Hello everyone, this is Mr. Underkoffler. Today we're looking at the guided notes called Solving Problems with Percent. All right, here are the big ideas. As a repeat from what we talked about on the intro to percent guided notes, percent is a ratio. That means out of 100. Now let's talk about going from percent form to decimal form. This is kind of a backwards thing that we did from the previous guided notes where we were focusing on going from decimal form to percent form. Here's how this works, and I have this typed up for you. The digit to the left of the decimal point that's in percent form must go in the hundredths place value when written in decimal form. Now, why? Because percent means out of 100. So, for example, 29% really means 29 hundredths because percent means out of 100. So 29 with that percent symbol really means 29 out of 100, which is 29 hundredths. So the decimal point, since we didn't see it on the whole number percent, was actually right here. You can go ahead and draw that with me here as I did it on my screen. Do it on your paper, please. And so moving that 2 places to the left will put that 9 in the hundredths place value. Let's look at the next one. How about 6.25%? I need the 6 to be in the hundredths place value. So the way I do that is by moving it 2 places to the left, making it 0.0625. Notice what we said here. The digit to the left of the decimal point in percent form. That digit is going to end up in the hundredths place value. So we're talking about the 6 ending up in the hundredths, 6 hundredths. And then the 2.5 part just ends up to the right of it, the thousands and the 10,000s. How about this one, 121%? Where is that decimal point? Well, this is a whole number percent like we had here, so it's at the end, and we're going to move that 2 places to the left to get the 1 in the hundredths place value. So that's going to make it 1 and 21 hundredths because percent means out of 100, even though this was over 100%. So notice, if it's over 100%, instead of being 0 point something, it'll be 1 point something, or if it was 200 and something percent, it'd be 2 point something. That's how this works. Hopefully you've written all this down in this little box on the top right of your guided notes page. Okay, now we're going to be going from word problems, and we need to make sure that you understand how to go from words to a percent equation. So how do we do that? Follow along with me here. From a word problem, we need to figure out what the percent is being taken of. You're like, why? Because a percent of something mathematically means the percent in decimal form times that thing. So if I need to find a percent of 1,000, I would take it times 1,000. But when I say the percent to be in decimal form. So this is the percent equation that I was talking about up here. The percent equation is that the part is equal to the percent in decimal form times the total or whole amount. And the words are often going to say a percent of something. Of means times. So that's why it's the percent in decimal form times whatever that thing is, which is going to be the total or whole amount. So you'll see similar vocabulary words here. Part and whole or total amount. Similar vocabulary that we were talking about on the intro guided notes page. And by the way, just as a side note, since this is something equals something times something else, that's the form of a proportional relationship, which we used to call generically in the last unit y equals k times x. But that's what this basically is. Now, do you really have to remember that? No, but that's how this ties into proportional relationships. Okay, that all being said, let's remind you, what do you do if the problem asks you to find the percent? Well, then it's what we learned on the guided notes called Intro to Percent, finding the percent. You have to figure out what's out of what, who's the part, who's the whole, and then you will divide and change the decimal form into percent form. That's going the other way, moving the decimal point 2 places to the right, to throw it back into percent form instead of what we were doing earlier at the top of the page, which was going from percent form to decimal form. Okay, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, this bottom part of the first page, this is going to be your key. I would look back at this on pretty much any word problem that you are going to do on the following pages. Here's the flow chart. I would, after you've read the problem on your own, I would ask, what does the problem ask me to find? If it asks me to find the percent, then I just have to know what is out of what, so I can divide in the correct order, get the decimal, move it 2 places to the right, boom, I got my percent. But if the problem asks me to find something else, something other than the percent, then I have to figure out what's the percent taken of. Because what the percent is taken of will be what you're going to multiply it to, making sure the percent that you're going to convert it into decimal form. And then that percent in decimal form times the whole will equal the part. That's the percent equation that you will use to solve the problem. Let me demonstrate by doing 1, 2, and 3 with you. So pencils ready. Here we go. Calculators ready. Problem number 1. Allie made 97% of the 200 layups that she attempted. How many layups did she make? Okay. I'm going to help you dissect these word problems. And I'm going to basically follow the flow chart we were talking about on the first page. What is the problem asking me to find? Is it the percent or is it something else? Well, here it said, how many layups did she make? So we're going to go ahead and write that down. The problem asking me to find how many layups did she make. So asking you to find how many layups, that's not asking for a percent. So we're not going to do part divided by whole because that's what you do to get the percent. We are not asked to get the percent. In fact, they already told us the percent. So we are trying to find the number of layups. So instead, we're going to use the percent equation. But before you do that, I want you to ask yourself, what is the percent taken of? So the way you can figure that out, find the percent symbol. Here it is. And then does it tell you what the percent is of? Oh, right here. The percent is of the 200 layups that she attempted. So fill in these blanks. It's 97% of, yes, I'm emphasizing the word of because of means times. I'm trying to get you to see how you can go from the words directly into the math. Okay, so 97% of the 200 layups that she attempted. You're writing all this down. If I go too fast, feel free to hit pause at any point as you're writing things down. So what I'm going to do is take this part here, 97% of the 200 layups, and I'm going to write that mathematically. 97% is 97 hundredths. Remember, you would take the decimal point from percent form, which if it's a whole number of percent, it's at the end. Move it 2 places to the left. That's what I did to get 97 hundredths. Of means times, as you saw, I had that here, the total or whole amount. Well, basically what it was after of. 97% of the 200 layups means 97 hundredths times the 200 layups. It's really that simple. You just have to know what the percent is of. Now, that's going to be equal to the part. Now, you might be like, well, is the part a number or is it, do we not know what the part is? Well, what did they ask us to find? How many layups did she make? We know how many she attempted, which we just figured out is what's going to be multiplied to the percent of decimal form. We don't know how many she's going to make. So that has to be the part. It has to be. It's the only thing that's left. So I picked a letter that I thought made sense. I could have picked L for layups, but L's can sometimes look like ones unless you make them like lowercase cursive. So I chose M for the layup she's going to make. All right. Since I am solving for a variable that is by itself, then I'm just going to do the math that's on the right-hand side, which is 0.97 times 200. Go ahead and do that in your calculator. That should give you 194. And since we're trying to find the layups made, let's put a label here, layups. All right, let's do another problem together. Problem number 2. Heather has decided to give $4,805 to charity, which is 6.2% of her salary. How much money is her salary? All right, what does the problem ask me to find? As we have in a lot of these problems, it's usually given in the very last sentence. How much money is her salary? Okay, write that down. We're trying to find the money that happens to be her salary. What is the percent taken of? Well, here's the percent symbol, and it says 6.2% of her salary. So let's fill this in. 6.2% of her salary. Now let's take that and translate it to math. 6.2%. We're going to put that percent in decimal form. So we're going to take this decimal and move it 2 places to the left to write it in decimal form. That's going to make it 0.062 times, which is the word of whatever's next, her salary. So now we got to do a little thinking here. Do we know her salary or is it unknown? And if you're like, well, is the 4,805, is that her salary? Go back and read those words. She's going to give 4,805 to charity. That's not the salary. That's the part that she gives to charity. Yes, I'm using the word part on purpose. Spoiler alert for what we're eventually going to put in for the part. If the question is how much is her salary, then that means the salary is the unknown. So there you go. Her salary is unknown. What are we going to do? We're going to pick a variable because at 6.2% of her salary, we don't know the salary. How much money is her salary? That's the question. So that's the unknown. And as I alluded to earlier, the 4,805 is the dollars that is going to charity. That's only part of her salary. That's only 6.2% of her salary. So that is the part. Now that you have that written down, let's solve. Unlike the previous problem, this one, the variable is not by itself. So to get it by itself, like we had talked in previous weeks of learning so far, we have to do the inverse. And the inverse of multiplying is dividing. And like you've learned before, you're going to do that on both sides. So write this down with me. And in your calculator, you're going to type in this part, the 4,805. It's on top, so you write it down first. Divided by, or I shouldn't say you write it down first. You type it in your calculator first. Divided by 0.062. Write that in your, or type that in your calculator. Make sure you got the 0 there to the right of the decimal point. That's important. And that should give you 77,500. If you only got 7,750, again, maybe you lost the 0 here, didn't have the decimal point at the right place, whatever. Always double check that you're typing things in your calculator correctly. So there you go. That is her salary, which is what the problem was asking us to find. And by the way, we should always make sure our answers make sense. Should the salary be more than what you're giving to charity? Yes, it should be. The charity was $4,805. Does that sound like that would be 6.2%? A small percentage of the salary? Yeah, it does. All right, let's try number 3. Take a look at it with me. I will lead you through this, and then you're going to try the next 3 on your own. Liz bought an item from an online store that charges a percent of the total cost to determine the shipping cost. The item she bought totaled to $281, and her shipping charge was $8.43. What was the percentage for the shipping rate? Okay, this problem is very different. It's the first one I've given you so far, where it is asking what was the percentage. So the problem wants us to find the percent for the shipping rate. Wait a minute. Do we do the same thing when we try to find the percent? If you look back at the flow chart at the very first page, if you're asked to find the percent, then instead of trying to do percent of something, which becomes the percent in decimal form times something, no, you have to just figure out who's the part, who's the whole, and then divide. Oh, yeah, like we did on the intro to percent guided notes. So back to where I was. What is out of what? Who's the part? Who's the whole? Is the 281 out of 843, or is the 843 out of 281? Well, I hope you understand. The 843 was just the shipping charge. That's just part of the total cost. So let's fill this in. 843 is the part. The total cost. Total is another word for whole. That's the whole. We are going to divide the part by the whole, like we did on the intro to percent guided notes where we were just finding the percent, because this problem wants me to find the percent. So calculator time, 8.43 hit the division key, not the fraction key, and then 281. What does that equal? Yes, you should get 0 point something. This is normal when you're solving for a percent, unless the part would somehow be bigger than the whole, which is definitely not the case here. So that should give you 0.03. Move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and you will get the percent. Okay, I would like for you to try numbers 4, 5, and 6 on your own. I would not go ahead to number 7 or 8 or 9. I would just try 4, 5, and 6 on your own. So hit pause in the video, go through the guiding questions like I showed you. Feel free to look back at the flow chart that we looked at on the first page to guide you through the process. And then you'll eventually solve at the end of each problem. So 4, 5, and 6. Hit pause now, do those 3 problems, and then hit play when you're ready to see how you did. Okay, have you already done 4, 5, and 6? If not, hit pause now. You need to try these problems on your own. All right, number 4. What did the problem ask me to find? It asked me how many kids is the coach hoping is going to come tomorrow? What is the percent taken of? Well, right up here, let me highlight. It says 350% of yesterday's number. So that's what you should have written down. And, spoiler alert, we know yesterday's number. It told you in the very first sentence, 12 kids showed up to the gym yesterday. So yesterday's number was 12. So that's why I put here in parentheses that you're going to write the actual words of phrase, which we've been doing, but sometimes you can figure out what that number actually is. So now that we know the 350% of yesterday's number, that's 3.50 times yesterday's number, because it's of yesterday's number, and yesterday's number is 12. Equals, we don't know the part. We don't know how many kids the coach hopes comes tomorrow. Tomorrow is not yesterday. So tomorrow is the part, and it is the unknown. I chose T for tomorrow. I don't really care what letter you picked, but the unknown is the part. So kind of like problem number 1, you're just going to multiply. You're going to get 42 kids. And does this answer make sense? Well, the coach wants it to be 350% of yesterday's number. So yeah, tomorrow should be bigger than yesterday. And 42 is bigger than yesterday's number of 12. This makes sense. Problem number 5. What did the problem ask you to find? It asked you to find what percent goes into savings. When you're asked to find the percent, then you just have to figure out who's the part and who's the whole. Hopefully you realize $120 going in the savings account is just part of what Samira earned from her work. So that's the order you're going to divide. Yes, you should get 0 point something, which you should expect on almost every single percent problem, unless the part will be bigger than the whole. And that's going to give you 0.0714. It said round the answer to the nearest tenth of a percent. I hope you didn't round this too early. If you rounded this to 0.1, this is not percent form yet. It didn't say round the decimal form to the nearest percent. It said round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So move it 2 places to the right, then round. And the way you'll round is you see that the digit to the right of what's going to be in the tenths place value, which right now is the 1, is that digit to the right of it 5 or more? No, it's only 4 or lower. So this 0.1 will stay 0.1, 7.1%. If you messed it up, feel free to fix whatever you got to fix. And then problem number 6. During a trip, well, you already read the problem. What does it ask you to find? It said how many miles was the entire trip. Now, what's the percent taken of? We can clearly see that the percent symbol was in this first sentence, and it said 68.75% of the distance traveled. Okay, so you wrote that down. Now, you have to do a little interpreting here. Well, let me jump ahead to putting the percent in decimal form. Move the decimal point 2 places to the left, 0.6875 times, that's the easy part. Who is the total or whole amount? What is the percent taken of? It's taken of the distance traveled. What does that mean? that means the entire trip's distance traveled, because only 68.75% of the distance traveled was on freeways. So the freeway distance is part of the total distance for the entire trip. And we do not know the number of miles for the entire trip. That's literally what they told you to find. So the total is unknown. The distance on the freeways is just part of the total distance. That's the interpretation you needed to do to understand what do they mean by distance traveled. They meant the entire trip's distance traveled, because the 352 is just the traveling distance on the freeways. That's just part of the total. Okay, since the variable was not by itself, you're going to have to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division, and that's going to give you 512 miles. All right, the remaining problems are not going to have the guiding questions typed out for you. However, you should still ask yourself those questions in your head to help you solve each problem. So, finally, try 7, 8, and 9 on your own. There are no guiding questions, but ask them in your head still so you know how to set up the percent equation in the correct way to solve the problem. So hit pause, do 7, 8, 9 on your own, then hit play once you're ready to see how you did. All right, hopefully you've already done 7, 8, and 9. Otherwise, you better hit pause now, because here I go. I take that percent, I write it in decimal form, times, now how do I know what it's times by? Well, it is 22.5% of his team's average points per game. And it just so happens that the question was asking how many points does the team average each game. So if it's 22.5% of the team's average points, and we don't know what their average points are, then that is the unknown. And the 16.4 points is just part of the team's total points. Now, I chose P for points. Maybe you should have chosen T for the team's total points. Maybe that would be a better choice. Since the variable is not by itself, we're going to do the inverse, which is to divide. And you're going to get 72.8 repeating points per game. I know you're like, how could you get a repeating decimal of points in a game? Well, you wouldn't. But this is average points per game. So averages can be decimals. I put PPG for points per game. Problem number 8. What is the question asking you to find? It's asking you to find how many seats are on the plane. What is the percent of? 90% of all the seats on the plane. So 2 problems in a row where the percent in decimal form is times an unknown. 90% of all the seats. We don't know how many seats there are altogether on the plane. So that is the unknown. The 216 are just the part of the total seats that happen to have been filled by the passengers. So that is your part. Now, like number 7, we're going to have to divide on both sides. That should give you 240 seats. If you need to hit pause to fix anything that you did, please feel free to do so. And finally, problem number 9. This is a little unique because it is asking, and I'm going to highlight this in green like I did in the last 2 problems, how many people preferred watching shows on Netflix or YouTube if 4,600 people participated in the survey. So Netflix or YouTube means those 2 combined. They did not want 2 different answers. They only want 1 answer. So it's those 2 combined. 58% when you take the 22 and the 36% added together. We're going to put that in decimal form times, what is the percent taken of? Well, unlike the other problems we've had, we don't have a percent of. But you should remember it's the percent of the total or whole amount. And it just so happens that they told me that 4,600 people participated in the survey. That's the total number of people who participated in the survey. That's the whole amount. The part of that total would be the part that is of the people who are watching Netflix or YouTube. So it's always the percent of the total or whole amount. So even though we don't have the of showing up in this word problem like we did on pretty much almost all the other problems, we can figure out the total or whole amount is the 4,600. So The part that is watching the people who are watching Netflix or YouTube, that's just the part. So that's your unknown. And I chose P for people. You could choose whatever letter you want, maybe N for Netflix, Y for YouTube. I don't care, whatever you want. This time the variable is by itself. So we're not going to divide on both sides. We're just going to multiply. That's going to give us 2,668 people. It actually gave me a whole number. If it didn't, it did say here, round to the nearest whole number if necessary, because you can't have a partial person. So there you go. And that concludes the guided notes on solving problems with percent. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.